Welcome to Comical Recovery. I am your host with the most trauma, comedian Jessica Byrne, creator of the upcoming cartoon Bud Ease, winner of multiple East Coast comedy contests, and 35 consecutive years of life experience in the School of Hard Knocks. Subscribe, hit the like button for recognition. Tell all your friends about your new addiction, because sharing is caring. We're picking up where we left off, me and all of my personalities. We're going to pick up where we left off with boundaries, because it's a hot topic and I think it's super relevant these days. I want to make sure that I get this stuff out to everyone, because I think boundaries are a really important topic. So, we are reading from Boundaries, When to Say Yes, When to Say No, to Take Control of Your Life. Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend. I'm going to go ahead and graze over the first chapter, but if you want to catch the sleeve and the things that we talked about last time, go ahead and pop over to the first Boundaries. I think it says chapter 2. I don't know what else it says because I didn't edit it, and it is what it is, so you're welcome. What's the problem? First, trying harder isn't working. Second, being nice out of fear isn't working. In the beginning of this, it has a couple of examples and stories, and in the beginning of the other episode, I'm pretty sure I mentioned how I hate that part of this book, so I'm grazing over and picking out the meat and potatoes of the topic. Third, taking responsibility for others isn't working. So these are just basic ideas about boundaries. Trying harder to expend a lot of energy to create the outcome that you want is not going to work, is what the first thing is trying to say. Being nice out of fear doesn't work because we're not doing something that's in line with our spirit, and we're actually going to break our own boundary by doing that. And then the third is taking responsibilities for others doesn't work. Because when I take up someone else's responsibility, I am taking the consequences of their inaction away from them and their ability to learn how to take responsibility of their own life. So it's really important that I keep in my sandbox, as my therapist likes to say. So I'm going to throw at you some therapy terminology from my therapist to you. The next sentence that I have highlighted here is we were created to take responsibility for certain tasks. Part of taking responsibility or ownership is knowing what our job is and what it isn't. Workers who continually take on duties that aren't theirs will eventually burn out, and you end up having resentments as well. What happens for me, especially in the workforce, is I go above and beyond, and then all of a sudden my boss looks at me and says, oh, well, if she can do X, Y, Z, then I'm going to give her A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I end up taking on a lot more than I signed up for, and I still get the same pay. Not very fun for me, personally. We need to set mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual boundaries for our lives to help distinguish what is our responsibility and what isn't. The questions at the end of this first chapter are, can I set limits and still be a loving person? Second question is, what are legitimate boundaries? Third is, what if someone is upset or hurt by my boundaries? Fourth is, how do I answer someone who wants my time, love, energy, or money? Fifth is, why do I feel guilty or afraid when I consider setting boundaries? Six is, how do boundaries relate to submission? 7, aren't boundaries selfish? Misinformation about the Bible's answers. By the way, this is a biblical text, so if you're not into that, then you might be sadly disappointed by reading this, but I think it's very helpful, and I try to avoid some of their scripture. I did not avoid it at all this first episode, but these future episodes I am, just in case you're not into that sort of thing. But if you are and you like that, then I highly suggest writing questions in the comment section or picking up the book on your own and checking it out. So, misinformation about the Bible's answers to these issues has led to much wrong teachings about boundaries. Not only that, but many clinical psychological symptoms, such as depression, anxiety disorders, eating disorders, addictions, impulsive disorders, guilt problems, shame issues, panic disorders, and marital and relational struggles, find their root in conflicts with boundaries. This book presents a biblical view of boundaries, what they are, what they protect, how they are developed, how they are injured, how to repair them, and how to use them. This book will answer the above questions and more. Our goal, meaning the book, is to help use biblical boundaries appropriately to achieve the relationship and purposes that God intends for you as His child. But seriously, there are really good answers, really good questions, and a really good biblical perspective on boundaries. And the reason I like the biblical perspective is, well, just like they said, there's a lot of misconceptions. I think that there's a lot of self-sacrificial interpretations when it comes to how we give ourselves of service to our fellows. And this book has given me a lot of clarity on what that actually means. And it's not self-sacrificing. So basically, it's really talking about how if I break my own boundaries, I'm not spiritually fit. So I end up being emotionally disturbed, and I'm emptying my cup with basically nothing in it, especially if I'm self-sacrificing. I'm spinning my wheels, not getting my own responsibilities done, and then I turn around and have resentments against other people that I'm actually helping when I should be setting boundaries. But my misconception of what I am supposed to do for others gets me in trouble. Or this book also talks about how the way that I was taught as a child can influence how I react or don't react, what I give, why I give. That was a pretty interesting topic that I read through, etc. Because there's just too much to go through at this point. What does a boundary look like is chapter 2. We kind of touched base on this a little bit. But in the beginning, there is a story about a couple parents, because there's usually two in a family, but not always, but typically two people make one person. Anyways, so this healthy family, or well, this family of parents has a child, and they talk about how they are helping this 25-year-old child, and he's not doing well in school, and he has money, and essentially they're enabling him. That's what the story's about. So they're going to a therapist, and they're talking to the therapist about this problem, and this therapist says, as it stands now, he is irresponsible and happy, and you are responsible and miserable. And that's what happens when we pick up responsibilities that are not ours. We're miserable, and that person's just happy-go-lucky, going about their day, not having to do anything, and we're miserable because we're picking up their responsibilities. So there's sections in each of these chapters, and I missed one of my highlights. He also says, well, I think the solution to the problem would be to clarify some boundaries so that his actions cause him problems and not you. So, yes, they're talking about the consequences of action or inaction in this case. Invisible property lines and responsibilities. The goal of this chapter is to help you define your intangible boundaries and to recognize them as an ever-present reality that can increase your love and save your life. Me and not me. Boundaries define us. They define what is me and what is not me. A boundary shows me where I end and someone else begins, leading me to a sense of ownership. Knowing what I am to own and take responsibility for gives me freedom. Taking responsibility for my life opens up many different options. And while I'm reading this, I think of relationships. And in a relationship, we don't always have the same boundaries or the same responsibilities, rather, the same responsibilities. However, I think it's very important to a healthy relationship that expectations and responsibilities are discussed prior to being deeply involved. Because, first of all, that sets the groundwork for good communication. When you can discuss the responsibilities that you are capable of or willing to take care of with your partner, it sets the stage for the other person to also take responsibility for the things that they are capable of. Not everyone is good at the same things. It does not mean that there are 1960 rules of women are barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen and cleaning. But it doesn't mean that it can't be that way. And it also doesn't mean that a man can't do that if the woman wants to be the breadwinner. I am not worried about the sexes, the responsibility of the sexes, or if they're the opposite sex. What I think is important is just being really clear that two people are a team, and teamwork makes the dream work. Much like any other business or career or work environment, Any relationship needs to have a sense of responsibility and set obligations so that people don't get resentments. Sometimes responsibilities can look like happening after the fact because we don't know what we don't know until mistakes are made. And I think that it's important to have some kind of allowance to learn from being human and not being robots and mind readers, because that is unrealistic. So until there's a little fumbling going around or going on, there's no way of knowing what one's responsibilities might be. So, boundaries help us to define what is not our property and what we are not responsible for. We are not, for example, responsible for other people. Nowhere are we commanded to have other control, although we spend a lot of time and energy trying to get it. 2 and 4. Everyone has responsibilities that only he or she can carry. It's what we're capable of. Not everyone is capable of the same things. If you don't have an arm, you're not going to be able to clean or cook or whatever you use arms for, because they're important. No one can do certain things for us. We have to take ownership of certain aspects of our lives that are our own load. We are expected to deal with our own feelings, attitudes, and behaviors. Problems arise when people act as if their quote-unquote boulders are daily loads and refuse help, or as if their daily loads are boulders they shouldn't have to carry. The result of these 2 instances are either perpetual pain or irresponsibility. It is very important to determine what me is, where my boundary of responsibility is, and where someone else's begins. That's why communication is so important. Good in and bad out. Boundaries help us to distinguish our property so that we can take care of it. We need to keep things that will nurture us inside our fences and keep things that will harm us outside. Sometimes we have bad on the inside and good on the outside. In these instances, we need to be able to open up our boundaries to let the good in and the bad out. In other words, our fences need gates in them. For example, if I find that I have some pain or sin within me, I need to open up and communicate it to God and others so that I can be healed. So if you didn't listen to the first podcast, I'm going to go ahead and explain my personal definition of sin. And I think I kind of touched base on that just a bit before when I said that we have emotional disturbances inside of us, or it's not sitting well within our spirit or our soul. So my grandmother always says that if it's from God, it's going to have peace and calm. And if it's all distorted and stressful and it makes you feel edgy, it's probably not sitting well in your spirit. Therefore, it's a sin against your spirit. That's my personal definition. Your personal definition is yours, and I am totally capable of being wrong and okay with that because I'm human. So perhaps you do not feel that that is what sin means to you, but that is what sin is interpreted for me personally. So, as it stated before, boundaries are not walls, they are gates. So there's some breathing room, and the gate should have a door that opens and closes, because we can't sit with turmoil and an abundance of stress all to ourselves if there are people willing to help. If I suck at tech, then it's only appropriate for me to at least ask someone some questions, and they can guide me to a YouTube video that has tech advice for what I'm looking for, or a person. In my case, animation is what I'm always asking about, because I don't really want to learn it by myself or at all, honestly. But so far, it looks like I might have to YouTube it. Often, when people are abused while growing up, they reverse the function of boundaries and keep the bad in and the good out. This is when we have bad support systems and we get punished for our feelings. Then we tend to keep those feelings inside of us. And then we actually don't let any good come in, because those bad things are just perpetually on this repeated tape player, planted deeply into our belief system. And until we have a support system or tools or coping mechanisms, we can't extract those weeds from our garden, the garden of our mind, as I like to say. I stole that from Deepak Chopra, just in case you've already heard it from him. But I like to read and listen to spiritual teachers and let's not call it steal, borrow the amazing verbiage that they pass to those of us that are starving for spiritual fulfillment. That would be me. God also limits what we allow in his yard. He confronts sin and allows consequences for behavior. He guards his house and will not allow evil things to go on there. He invites people in who will love him, and he lets his love flow outward to them at the same time. The quote-unquote gates of his boundaries are open and close appropriately. Examples of boundaries. Skin. We touched base on that. Victims of physical and sexual abuse often have poor sense of boundaries. Early in life, they were taught that their property did not really begin at their skin. Words. The most basic boundary setting word is no. No is a confrontational word. People with poor boundaries struggle with saying no to the control, pressure, demands, and sometimes the real needs of others. They feel that if they say no to someone, they will endanger their relationship with that person. So they passively comply but inwardly resent. Once again, this is where that sin is created, that disturbance emotionally, because it's not sitting well with your soul and your needs. And when we say yes to other people's responsibilities, if we're willing to say yes to another person's responsibilities that is causing us an emotional disturbance, chances are we're putting off our needs in order to people please. That's what I do. That's what I'm really good at. I'm really, really good at that. Truth. There's always safety in truth. Well, when you're a victim of physical and sexual abuse, that is not the case. So I just wanted to disqualify that right away. Because first of all, we're recapping. And secondly, I want to validate anybody's experience that has been like mine. When you have that violation, especially at a young age, the truth tends to be unsafe as well. So as you get older, I find that the truth will set me free, because even though it still hurts when someone doesn't respect the truth or maybe uses that against me, I find out who they are quickly. And then it's my responsibility to keep them out of the gates of my personal space, my truth, my personal life in general, possibly, depending on the circumstances. But it's a really awesome tool to have, actually, that can, clear out the garden of yucky people in your life. And you can start creating room for people that can handle the truth and honesty, that are worthy of being in your inner circle. Honesty about who you are gives you the value of integrity and oneness. So being honest with yourself allows to hear your inner voice, hear that emotional disturbance happening, so that you do not let the wrong people in, or you do not compromise your needs to satisfy the needs of others, to create this people-pleasing tendency that gives you this false self-esteem and validation. Geographical distance. Sometimes physically removing yourself from a situation will help maintain boundaries. Removing yourself from a situation will also cause the one who is left behind to experience a loss of fellowship that may lead to changed behaviors. I am going to go ahead and read the next paragraph because that's something we talked about beforehand in the first podcast of boundaries anyways, was when a relationship is abusive, many times the only way to finally show the other person that your boundaries are real is to create space until they're ready to deal with the problem. And me and Jen touched base on how sometimes creating space doesn't allow the person to come back in. They have to have real change that's permanent, not just temporary. Because in real abusive situations, it's generally just temporary. Sometimes people are healing. Sometimes people are healing from addictive behavior or just behavior that they were taught as kids. And we don't know what we don't know until we're aware of it. But setting a boundary that's physical and removing yourself is a surefire way to let that person know that you are being real, that your words aren't empty, because talk is cheap. So it's important to follow through and mean what you say, and say what you mean, but don't say it mean. Time. Taking time off from a person or a project can be a way of regaining ownership over some out-of-control aspect of your life where boundaries need to be set. And I can attest to that for the cartoon that I work on. When I am trying to push myself to make things happen, I make a lot of mistakes. When I am forcing myself to do a portion that I'm just burnt out on, whether it's coloring or some kind of tech thing, I am going to make mistakes. It's just a guarantee. So it's important for me to take a break. And then it's also really important for me to take a break when I'm creating something in creative mode, because when I'm at a creative block and I walk away and I go and do something fun with friends or out in nature, there's an opportunity for me to get inspired, and then I can come with fresh eyes to that project or make something brand new. Emotional distance. Emotional distance is a temporary boundary to give your heart the space it needs to be safe. You should not continue to set yourself up for hurt and disappointment. Other people. There are 2 reasons why you need others to help with boundaries. First, your most basic need in life is for relationships. The other reason we need others is because we need new input and teachings. We need supportive people to stand against the old messages and the guilt involved in changing. It's great to have a support system when you're giving up a bad habit or healing from a traumatic event. Creating boundaries always involves a support network. Consequences. We need to back up our boundaries with consequences. Like I said before, talk is cheap, so we need to say what we mean what we say, don't say it mean. And if you say, my therapist and I talk about different kinds of boundaries, a non-negotiable boundary is, if you call me a liar one more time, I'm going to block you. I actually did that with someone. That's why I made that reference. That was a non-negotiable boundary. This person kept accusing me of being a liar and saying mean things, and so I said, if you don't stop, then I am going to block you and we will not be friends, and we are not. Consequences give some good barbs to fences. They let people know that you're serious. If you trespass, then the seriousness of our respect for ourselves will have a consequence. This teaches them that our commitment to living according to helpful values is something we hold dear and will fight to protect and guard. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Comical Recovery. Recovery comes in layers, and laughter is the best medicine. I am your wellness coach, yogi, and comedian here to tickle your funny bone all the way to recovery. So if you're like old me, don't keep everything inside your head like a destructive, swirling tornado wreaking havoc into your future. Let's vomit it out together in one big, beautiful trauma-bonded relationship of healing, sharing our experience, strength, and hope. Thank you for listening, sharing, subscribing, and passing me around like your favorite doobie. See you next time for more Comical Recovery with your friend and host, comedian Jessica Byrne.